Welcome to the e-commerce growth show, brought to you by Segmentify.
Hey everyone, this is Carlos again for another episode of the e-commerce growth show brought to you by Segmentify. Today we have Rafael Berti from Amazon, from Paragon, and Hans Elmegaard. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
So Hans has an incredible experience in logistics. Instead of having me, talking a lot, Hans, about your background, I mean, perhaps you can introduce yourself. You're super international. You have a very interesting career in logistics and e-commerce as well. So we would like you to give us the big picture. Tell us about yourself and your journey in the commerce and logistics industry.
Sure. Thanks very much, Carlos. Very much appreciate it. And thanks again for the opportunity to be part of this. Super exciting. That's correct. My name is Hans. I'm 45 years old, married to a Canadian. We got 2 small children. Relocated back to Denmark, where I'm originally from, for around 3 years ago. Before that, I've been living 11 years abroad in a number of different kind of countries: Hong Kong, the Netherlands, Amsterdam, and latest in Switzerland. I have, the entire career has been spent in the logistics space. To be frankly honest, 24 years this month. I've been within logistics, working for 5 different types of companies. Typically, traditionally the larger one, all from Agility to DSV to Maersk, Damco as well, and latest DSDL organization. My career has been quite broad. I do consider myself being an international citizen. I am, a guy who always been following the changes in the consumer market, even from a logistics standpoint of view. And that's where I, of course, find these times, what's happening at the moment, and also have happened the last number of years, quite interesting. And indeed, all the challenges we're gonna, face going forward, because it's just gonna be a continuing speed of constantly changes which affecting the logistics industry at all. I would say that you'll not be super incorrect to say that my expertise within the industry are focused on supply chain, primarily in the retail and the fashion and the lifestyle sector. I among others, was leading that sector for the Damco Maersk organization for a number of years. And we go back now, 10 years ago when I joined that organization, dealing in all those, big brands and following, their trends in terms of, there was traditional brick mortar companies, traditional retail sales, generated a ton of revenue. We did supply chain management, visibility perspective from an origin perspective through to the distribution centers, etc. But of course, the whole push over that time changing from more like an online sales activities, which is increasing every years. I kind of got that into that area for around 10, 12 years ago, because basically you could see the trends with the companies we were dealing with at that time. On that note, I just been following quite closely, and are really driven by the changes on it. And despite that, I have been in the organization, in the industry for 24 years. I think it's fair to say it's a quite conservative industry, logistics, and I have to be careful what I'm saying, but not necessarily super strategic in the way of approaching the market. And the changes what's happening in the industry, in the world at the moment, driven by the consumer changes. A lot of companies are definitely facing challenges going forward from a logistics perspective, because it's required to see more strategic around the customers going forward, and these investments which is required going forward for logistics company, and which is something to do about. It's an unknown territory for a lot of companies, but due to the rapid changes driven particularly in the change in the commerce and the online activities, brands within those, industries, fashion, lifestyle, retailers in generally, have become significantly more dependent on the logistics partners around it. And there are probably some are more dressed for success and ready for the future than others, I'll say.
Very nice.
Gave a little bit overview of what keeps you up in the morning?
Hans, there's a question that I had not planned this question, but if we look at and I asked Rafa this question the other day about the enemy, right? We fight in every journey, every company fights, or a market, an enemy. They have to sort of overcome an enemy today.
Yep.
Just getting a bit more philosophical here and trying to pick your brain. In logistics, and you kind of mentioned yesterday, it was very interesting because I agree very much. It is a sort of dinosaur industry, right? Is it fair to say that because it's a very traditional, let's use the proper English word, industry, or conservative for that matter, is it fair to say that it's not really consumer centric?
Correct.
And if it's not consumer centric, I mean, how this is something that we would speak anyhow, way ahead of our conversation. But since we're here now, how is it that consumers are changing the industry in that sense? And I think, then e-com is a big sort of thing that drags that change, right? That pulls that change force.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Carlos. This is, I think we can kind of, despite that you mentioned the conservative, I'll say, industry of logistics, in generally, however, it has always been the buying consumer behaviors which have changed the logistics industry. If you kind of go like 110, 20 years back, when you're starting with small corner shops, and selling tobacco on a corner in Europe and North America, and particularly, how logistics was framed around that, small trucks, horses, etc. Throughout various different types of decades, up to, just to mention something, in the 70s. In the 70s, that was really a massive change in the industry where, particularly the whole big box area, where a lot of the shipping lines, like Maersk, established Maersk Line. P&O took Damco. You got OOCL, you get NYK with use, like basic origin consolidators. A logistics company was established by the shipping companies. That happened in the 70s because they've suddenly found a need to help their customers who were importers. All the Tesco's, the Target, the Walmarts, the Sears, the everyone, they basically need somebody to take care of the vendor management from a origin perspective. Therefore, what they call supply chain management from a origin consolidated perspective was established in the 70s. So if you kind of look down the list, what kind of companies within that field was established in the 70s? That was exactly within that list is quite long, simply because of the fact there was a need from their customers because of the change that the industry was changed from that. Now we can jump, 40 years onwards. We now in 2021, almost 2022, and I think that it's not incorrect to say that what had happened over the last 10 years has been very, very interesting because of something like technology in order to support the online sales has grown tremendously. We talk about the logistics industry, where if you talk about the traditional large global freight forwarders, you so say logistics providers, they have always, as a history, had focused what's happening from an origin perspective, including consolidation activities, and then the international transportations, whether as air freight, ocean freight, or road traffic, or even train now, until it hit a so-called destination distribution center or fulfillment center, call it what you want, and then have always considered like, that job is done. Mm-hmm. Simply because that has been the priority. And for the last many, many years and always, there has basically grown a local hero environment all around the world, both here in Denmark, where we're based right now, in the US, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Spain, in Asia, etc., who has been focusing on the consumer, basically. So everything was hit around a fulfillment center or warehouse operation, where they're normally, unloading containers and unpacking and packed it to and distributed to retail stores, primarily to the consumer market. It was in that space where they also need to adapt to changes when consumers ordering online. So it happened there. So it basically didn't really paid much attention to the majority of the traditional logistics industry because they didn't have focus on that area. Therefore, there's existing a completely very fragmented, I'll say, environment within the, I'll say, the last part of the supply chain, like from when it hit a consumer area or destination area warehouse until it hits the warehouse, until it hit the retail store or your private address, if that's what you decide to do. So that has been a development surrounded by local investments, by the technology, etc., which not necessarily has been filled up with a lot of input from the traditional old-fashioned shipping logistics industry. And that is what's coming up to the surface right now, simply because the supply chain, which from an end-to-end perspective, when we talk about visibility, is merging together. You also if you look at retailers today, a traditional like a VP or SVP for supply chain and logistics has historically only been focused on what happened from origin to hit to a destination center, not about the last part. These two things are merging together within brands, within retailers. So they kind of have to look at from an end-to-end perspective because the demands come from their consumers, was changing rapidly. And that challenge, there's only a limited amount of, I'll say, operators within the logistics industry who's really able to take that on still. And that's what was driving. And these changes just, I'll say, are increasing the speed of change constantly, driven by the consumer. I don't know if that makes sense, Carlos, to how where the industry is coming from. It's a very, very, I'll say, traditional, strong thinking, quite transactional thinking about volume, international freight, etc. But in reality, it's the consumer market who's changing the industry, and it's not necessarily paid attention to that level where it should to. And that now comes as a surprise for many companies.
So if I may jump in, and if I understood correctly, what you're saying is that the consumers have been pushing the industry because the demand has been in such a large scale that the industry had to innovate, even though, as Carlo mentioned before, is a very traditional, very, I'm not saying, I don't know if old is a good adjective for this, but it's very traditional and slow to move into new directions. But the industry is having to adapt now, since the demand is so large and unprecedented, I would say. Right. That it's you see this challenges being coming, and the new spaces need to be filled in. And then in that sense, I have a question. So would you say then that is there a space for startups to come in with disruptive technologies or filling a gap that the old industry? Because from my understanding, the larger players in the shipping and logistics are getting even bigger. But is there a space for small companies, small startups to come in and do something truly amazing that will help in the whole logistics panorama?
Thanks for the question. I do believe there exists some very interesting companies already got to the market with focus on technology, and indeed there's room for more players within that field if you kind of identify the niche and you reason the gap in the markets. It's primarily, when you mention that subject there, well, I'll consider it's more like about the focus should be around integrations. It's simply because that technology has, as of history, not been, I'll say, high prioritized by many logistics companies, and it's not because of it probably maybe because it's never been a focused area, probably not ever been an interest either. But if you're thinking about how many, I'll say, larger logistics companies has been established throughout many years, they've been built of own pre-built technology, let's say like software, or own built or off the shelf, and different kind of types, and they are maybe now consisting themselves of maybe 100+ types of systems. But one thing which has been quite surprising, many of those systems are not minded towards the customers, the consumers. That's about, I'll say, for internal purposes, and that's a big change for a lot of companies today, logistics companies. So what you see right now, or have seen over the last number of years, is there are, I'll say, startups with, I'll say, consumer or customer-friendly integration software, which is exactly what the brand and the consumer want, are brought to the surface. You're starting seeing acquisitions of those. You're starting seeing that it's nothing about the size of the logistics industry. It's more about the flexibility and the integration with the many types of software that exist out there in the industry. And I think also this is also where, you know, things has been changed, where it's not that many years ago you could sit there in executive meetings for around the table and talking about what should our IT strategy be, right? And that was indeed I'll say a great wish from big portions of the industry. They want to build themselves, want to own everything themselves. But that's changed, because if you can't try to take consideration that you have around, I think it's approximately 90% of all the data you find on World Wide Web is less than 3 years old. And and that will only go one way. There'll just be more, I'll say, new and newer software if you need to adjust to that, need to be flexible to integrate with these, you can build those things themselves. So in a nutshell, it's going from our own technology mindset to an integration mindset. And that is not driven by the logistics industry. That's definitely driven by some of the, some of the startup and the new companies coming up. And they are quite specialized where that's in. So it's all the things like that.
Yeah. So in my understanding, it's something similar to what is happening towards banks, for instance, which is a very old industry as well.
Yes. Very
slow. And then what they're doing is they're basically building incubators, having their own startups, incentivizing startups to come in with new technologies, and then slowly adopting these technologies, incorporating it into their operations. So that's more or less what's happening with your industry now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's cloud-based. It is white label, software which on the market. And in order to follow that speed which is required from their customers, they have to tap in to these kind of technologies which can help them fulfill their needs quite quicker than they can do themselves.
Yeah, I think a bit of the thinking behind it is, it has always been winning like this, so you wouldn't change it. Basically, the whole industry has been a little bit of a bystander on what's going on, and if there would be any changes, they would be expecting faster airplanes, faster trains, and ships, and that's about it. But there's plenty of technologies and even like fleets that are coming in as well. And I don't know, I thought maybe you could comment as well, since we're touching this subject of technology. What do you think of drone fleets, the use of drones, maybe technologies such as blockchain for tracing particular goods? Or maybe in the future, would we even use rockets, to do transcontinental transportation? What are your views on this?
I'm not sure I have an opinion of everything, but I think the areas you said has already come here and are here to stay. Drones are being tested many places. It actually also, if you live in a certain part of the world, particularly in the Pacific Northwest around Seattle, right, there's options for these kind of deliveries, as you may know, right? So within an hour or two. But that's a development area. Also the whole blockchain area, that's a completely specific topic to this. But it's going to be more like a data-driven industry going forward, where the traditional disk is going to be a commodity, and where it's going to be difficult to add value if you don't have the value of the logistics not concentrate about the consumers, where it's about the flexibility as well. And then it's about the flexibility when you talk about the drone, or you want to deliver it on a green bicycle because you want to buy a sustainable piece of clothing. You also want to return, So there's so many, and then you can either, one thing I think the technology, you can either develop, I would say specific product to the specific logistics, or you can also be an expert in developing software to companies who need the flexibility to choose the different types of service you want. And as you know, as well, Rafael, like the e-commerce have really pushed one of the trends quite quickly around the globalizations, like, brands. You don't need to be a big brand in order to be global any longer. Because the online sales channels, you can establish a fulfillment hub closer to the consumers you like to approach. and even a country like Denmark, there's different needs in terms of, what you like, whether you're based in the city center of Copenhagen or you based somewhere outside the city. There's a massive change of what you as a consumer would like in terms of experience. Some would like the cheap and the fast one, and there's definitely also one who like them delivered in a specific time during the day, where there's a limited CO2, because that's part of their way of living. And if you have to multiply that up with other countries, then you mean there's not one model fits it all. There has to be, it's really the flexibility in order to serve the consumers different types of needs. Where, for instance, something about the drone is definitely something which we're going to see more for, probably more in specific areas than elsewhere. It also, like, just to see Europe, for instance, right? It isn't, we can't even call UK part of Europe any longer from that perspective, but it was actually Amazon started there in 1998. And development or the expectation from an online when you're a consumer in UK is significantly higher than it is, for instance, here in Denmark or in Germany and Sweden for that matter. And you need to be able to adjust to that. So that's why it's an endless, I'll say, area of new development, also technology in order to support the needs from the consumers.
Actually, I like that you mentioned Amazon, because that's my area of expertise.
Yes.
And it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because Amazon, as we know, it's a technology company. They have a big chunk of their business is the marketplace, the Amazon marketplace. They also have different services, also in the IT infrastructure and all that. But Amazon has put a lot of effort to provide a sustainable or maybe an end-to-end solution for their logistics. They have had for a long time hired third-party logistics companies to do the logistics for them. They had a program called ESP, where you could set up your own small or local logistic companies, and you could help just delivering. Amazon would hire you and your fleet just to make the deliveries in your area. But then Amazon also has grown to using, not only building warehouses, but they also have their own fleet of airplanes, drones, as we mentioned, and many others. They're also now starting to invest into ships. What are your views on that? Do you think Amazon can come in this industry and could be looked at as a possible competitor?
I have to admit, despite that many probably disagree with me, but I think it is a competitor to the industry right now. But I really think it's caused by the industry itself. It's simply due to the lack of innovation and understanding the future needs. What Amazon has done has been good at, as we all know, was investing in the future and continue to do that part of the strategy. And that's not necessarily a part of the, I'll say, must-win battles for the majority of the logistics and shipping companies. They're very much looking backwards, what volume they were moving on various trades. For instance, going back to the ocean freight you just mentioned there, like what kind of volume were they moving last year on various trades? So probably not necessarily thinking so much about that. Those volumes they were moving on specific trades may change next year because of there's different sourcing pattern and different kind of, I'll say, volumes, because the spreading of the consumers' goods are going on other trades as well. They're not necessarily looking at that. So what you're saying, for instance, about Amazon now going in controlling, I'll say, chartering own vessels. I'm not surprised about that, because there's a need for it. And of course, there's also very much driven about the situation the ocean freight industry, of course, has been in for the last, 12, 14, 15 months, where it's which I still believe is a temporary situation, and it's not something, otherwise the trees doesn't gonna grow into the sky, but it's a temporary situation we're facing here. But I just think, like, the industry, I'll say the consumer industry, or at least the retailers or the brands in between, like saying enough is enough in that way. So I'm not surprised about Amazon doing something like that. And there'll also be others who are going to do the same thing. They're going to take control of something because has suddenly they realized they were dependent on something where they didn't really support their needs. And some companies can actually be quite in big problems in the future if they don't get a supply chain to be resilient and smooth, supporting their business needs. And that's it's a no-brainer.
Right, but Amazon it's a Western company, and it's an American company, obviously global. But my understanding is that Asia is the global hub of logistics nowadays. So, are there any examples of companies in Asia? Would Alibaba do they do anything similar, or any companies like Tencent, or they're also buying fleet, or do you think would that be in their advantage, or that's not needed at all? They have great partnerships there. What are your views on that?
I think the ambition probably is there to do that, but the Asia, Alibaba, very much focused on Asia, and intra-Asia is a different market in itself. We have nearly 30% of all containers in the world moving within intra-Asia. It's not the big ships on the Trans-Pacific or on the European trade you focus on. It's a completely different kind of markets. But indeed, I'll be surprised if their strategy is not about, controlling, the logistics or the shipping activities much more, simply because they can't really get what I want. So that won't be that's not going to be a surprise if that's not their part of the agenda.
Hans, yesterday, sorry, Rafa, just a question here for me. We were speaking about the need of domain knowledge. You kind of mentioned that briefly. So you said, as of today, you're at Scan Logistics.
Scan Global Logistics, yes.
Scan Global, yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I find this very interesting that, so for example, traditionally companies, they've been looking to hire people that are from that specific industry, right? So, you will build your career in logistics, for example. But I think as we progress and things, evolve, so to speak, for you as someone who's looking at talent, you would look at someone not necessarily who comes with a logistics background, but someone who's been on the D2C background or the brand background, with that brand background, because they know really like the nuts and bolts of, especially in e-commerce, right? Someone who operated commerce. And maybe you can comment a little bit on finding talent and, the importance today of domain knowledge sometimes in cross industry. So you won't really look for someone who's been building that, boring, forgive me, career, like very squared in a way, finding talent and also a bit of the challenges of that. Because you mentioned that yesterday, and I thought it was super interesting, like having domain knowledge, and hiring someone sometimes who knows about e-commerce, but it's not from logistics per se.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. But again, it's driven by the changes from the outside the industry. It's basically based on demands from their customers who suddenly have a different need to logistics and understanding their, basically their sales channels, whether that online or offline. And that is historically not an area where the traditional logistics provider used to have a lot of attention to, because they didn't really have to serve those activities when about the sales. But since the fact that online sales has come here, online sales come here to stay, and it's a growing area, and this is part of the agenda from the customer, is to having a logistics or supply chain strategy and solutions to support the growing online sales still. Then it's basically been a must that the logistics industry, has to find talents from outside the industries, because it's not necessarily within the logistics industry where that kind of information sits. For instance, it's very like that. If you used to play football for many years, and then you've been figuring out you also have to be good at tennis. You don't take a football player to start playing tennis. You need to go and find a tennis player who can, I'll say, compete in that area, and that's basically what is necessary to get, I'll say, knowledge into the industry by basically through a diverse team with multiple different type of experience. The question is here, Carlos, is that will it be taken serious by the logistics industry? Will they actually, are they ready to adapt to that? Are they able to take it seriously, take it in, or will it be some kind of I'll say, a subdivisions of the core traditional? That's really up to the business culture from logistics company to logistics company. But indeed, what you are seeing, or have been seeing over the last number of years, is that there are being hired expertise, like investors in people and knowledge, which historically not coming or got the industry from the logistics industry. And that both count one thing about the technology side, being expert in e-commerce areas, so you typical maybe hire people from the other side of the table, meaning it could be, hiring people from a customer who understand really what their needs is. It's indeed also a lot of hirings, investments are made in the whole sustainable area. People with knowledge from specific industries are traditionally coming with I'll say, sustainable way of doing business. That is also not something which is super old in the logistics industry. And these people who are, I'll say, leading that within the logistics industry are not coming from the logistics industry. They're coming from elsewhere, from other industries. But honestly, I find that beautiful in order to that we actually see things are coming together. But it's definitely a change for the logistics industry that there are other types of persons who may not have been that long in the logistics industry, but they have come from a different angle. Those persons need to kind of be part of the logistics industry. I could imagine that there are some companies who's better to, I'll say, onboard that kind of knowledge, and in order to, I'll say, to support those needs compared to what you historically are coming from. I think it's more like a generation shift at the moment. You also see that when you're sitting and talking with customers. You used to be a transport manager or logistics manager ahead of something, but today when you're sitting talking strategic supply chain solution with the customers, you're having 7, 8, 9 sometimes types of stakeholders involved, all from an export manager, an e-com to a marketing to a CFO. It's not a matter about the price from A to B when you're talking about strategic supply chain. And you need to be able to have those dialogues and understand that need from the customers. And you can't do that coming from, I'll say, only coming from having the logistics background only.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating because from a hiring standpoint, like a hiring perspective, right? I was talking to a friend. She is the CDO, Chief Digital Officer at like a very traditional industry in Brazil. They make textiles, fabrics.
Yes.
And she's looking like she has to transform to digitize the whole thing, digitalize. So B2B sales, and she said, it's so old school, and she's been one of the pioneers in e-commerce in Brazil. She built the whole thing there with some other guys. She said, the person who sits in HR doesn't know how to hire. So we need someone in HR who's gone through the pains of e-commerce and digitalization, because otherwise this person won't even know how to talk and identify that person has the experience, of course, values and all of that, but the experience needed and knowledge, right, in the company, so they can make things happen. And I think it all goes back to the knowledge you have in-house, so you can sort of, and the customer also, because it's also a lot driven by the customer, there's requirements, right? And you as a logistics company, I don't think you just have to move goods from A to B, but you have to be opinionated. You have to, have knowledge in-house to tell the customer, which is what you're saying. These are the trends. This is how you do. This is what we are seeing in the market. And then you can only have that with knowledge. And it's really interesting, right? Those, I think, changes. And
yeah, I mean, if you want to adjust to change because there's demand for it, we just don't do more of the same, right? Then you need to do something different, and it definitely come with expertise and people, right? So but I personally, I love that diversity, that industries are coming together, and that's really how you're getting true end-to-end transparency in the supply chain, because each and every single chain are quite important here, not only one thing. But if I should, I'll say, make a little, I'll say, comment or red flag to that, is that the logistics industry also have to find a way to attract those kind of, I'll say, types to that industry, to that kind of knowledge. It's not like they're not driven necessarily by the same, I'll say, traditional values as a logistics person who have been in that industry the entire career. Always, there's other factors which keep them awake in the morning. Which could be about innovation, which could be about how the culture is in the business, or what's the purpose of the company, etc., etc. They need to be valued too. So the the logistics industry have to really be, I'll say, be doing their work quite well, and really in order to onboard and develop and invest in new types of expertise, because as we all know, right, we all want to be evaluated and get supported what we do from our professional standpoint of view. But if you're not valued because you're not understood, not only be taken above, they want to be valued. So that's a job there, I believe, for the entire industry. When you're hiring new types of people and you suddenly have a diverse team, you need to be able to treat and value and support all the types of knowledge you got in your team, right?
If I may comment on that, I think it's a bit of a reflection of the changes that happen in retail as well, as you mentioned, because it's driven by consumers, right? So we have the traditional retail that went from the brick and mortar to online, and suddenly managers had to cope with a whole different way of marketing their products, of marketing their brands, of incorporating logistics in a different way, because before it was just filling up their warehouses and make sure that all the products are visible in their store. Now they need to kind of apply the same principles, but in an online world. And so if you think of a e-commerce professional, if you need to form an e-commerce professional nowadays, it's not simply a guy that knows how to sell something. He needs to understand computers. He needs to understand how the data will move, photography, and enters the logistics is a major part, because you need to fulfill the orders in a certain time, returns, all that. But it also enters, depending on the business, also it enters a bit of legal issues that you need to be aware of, taxation if you're going cross-border. So there's a lot of domains, they're coming, they're converging in one place.
Yes.
And it seems to me that what you're saying is that the shipping and logistics industry is also moving in that direction as well. They finally caught up with that as well. So this change and the retail is now coming into the logistics, where you need to have an IT department. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand it's like now you have to have more than just having computers. You need to have a whole infrastructure for that, data silos, bringing people who understand the retail side of the industry. And I mean, this is crazy. So I'm actually, while you're saying that, I was actually thinking a lot about what happened in 2008. We had a great downturn of the economy, global, and that's, in my perspective, that's where one of the things that accelerate the growth of e-commerce, right? I basically started in the e-commerce industry because of that, do you see any similarities between that and what is happening now with the pandemic?
It's always in times with challenge, where new ideas, coming up to the surface. This is where people get creative. This is where companies are investing in new ideas. So yes, indeed. So what we had seen, I'll say, over the last year and a half and a bit more, has been crazy. And it's, of course, been, I'm not saying that we wouldn't have got to where we are from an online perspective. We would. But I think that there's a certain person who believe that where we are right now from online in the US is kind of 10 years ahead, where we were predicting it was 2 years ago. So it's definitely a situation like a world pandemic, have just changed. This is like the way of we buying our products, at least some of them, at least. And I think is that, both in a, also seen from a positive perspective, I think many companies have, known that they had to tap into this online thing, but it's always been in a drawer under the desk, and until it's going to get necessary, or when it's going to get high enough on the priority list. A year and a half ago, suddenly that, I'll say, file called online that was suddenly on the top of the disk, and it should happen yesterday. And that's indeed driven by that, because that's what they, I'll say, are facing those challenges, and that some customers, or companies, some brands has been better prepared for that than others. That's no doubt about that. We also seen that with the result of some retailers who have done better, and some brands have done better, right? So, and due to the fact that these changes are happening, where the growth is coming online, it's probably not like many companies who considering particularly in the retail and fashion and lifestyle industry, who want to, I'll say, own warehouse operations, right? They want to be less vulnerable. They want to minimize risk. It's probably not either, retail stores in larger cities. They want to invest so much in either, right? They rather, I'll say, get rid of those fixed costs, in terms of inventory, in terms of fixed costs in real estate, etc. And limited risk. So that has changed, of course, because of that.
That's very interesting. And then, since we're on the subject, because we're mentioning the pandemic, the whole change, I hear from a lot of traders that recently the expenses of importing or bringing of logistics has increasingly, one of them, he told me it's the price went tenfold from what it used to be 6 months ago, but without any other benefit. In fact, it takes longer than it used to. And then, of course, this is understandable, because we're in a period where there's a huge demand for logistics worldwide. My question for you is do you see a possibility that will this prices stay this high for a longer? Can we see the price normalize again? And also on that, do you foresee a future where companies or logistic companies will be able to predict, or at least be able to some kind of an elastic demand, or adjust quickly to high demands like this?
To answer the first question, then yes, this is a temporary situation. How long time it will going to continue, that I'm unable to say. I'll say container rate are not like that high compared to how it is, how it should be, even also for shipping lines to be profitable. I think some person say that it will continue throughout 2022 as well, but it's a little bit about the demand on it, and the capacity in the market as well. But I indeed believe that this is a temporary situation. And I think during that period of time, there will be a lot of development going on in terms of how to avoid such situation in the future. Because basically what companies want, they want to have a smooth, resilient supply chain where there's no surprises, around the logistics cost at the moment. Right now, they can't even count on a basic container rate from A to B. And some industries where the margin are lower than others, these industries are really, really bleeding at the moment due to the fact. And of course, it's a frustrating situation. When is this situation going to stop? What I think is going to happen is that this will not necessarily benefit the traditional transportation industry in the future, because companies want something different. They want to avoid being, obviously, being hosted in such situation where they can get out of it if they want to, because they're dependent on the situation. On the other hand, is that I also see that this could also be a reason, a really good reason to, I'll say, to take supply chain a bit more serious from the retailers and the brands directly, because normally or historically supply chain in generally has not necessarily been so high up on the agenda for many retailers, for many fashion brands and lifestyles. There has been something like an add-on cost they would like to minimize, because that's not been part of the business, I'll say, core business model. That has changed because they're realizing, these companies, that supply chain is an enabler, a core element of the entire business model. So if supply chain is not part of the agenda, even on board discussions, taking a thing, that's why suddenly then there'll be tremendous damages for these companies' well-being in the future. Therefore, it is also you starting seeing companies and executives, CEOs and COOs from not the logistics industry suddenly starting having a specific interest in the supply chain, whether that's in the origin side of it, but indeed around the consumer logistics part, how to adapt to it. And you see now being opinion about it, that they want something different. They want a strategic supporter from a logistics provider in order to survive, or in order to be flexible and understand their business needs, both from a short and a long-term perspective. So that is, I'll say, changing, which I consider being a positive thing, because I think the logistics industry has been able to be, I'll say, hidden away in a transaction environment, because it hasn't really been taken super serious by many companies. That you can buy logistics or supply chain activities from a transactional perspective or from a strategic perspective, and that is moving towards more like a strategic way of looking at the core business, simply because they're realizing we are facing, I'll say, that situation we are right now, where a lot of companies really having a challenge due to, for instance, the container rates, on being able to adapt quickly to online sales channel from a supply chain perspective, or adding more last mile providers to it, like in general, like that. That's a strategic way of talking about supply chain. It's nothing about, let's say, a box from A to B, right, from Hong Kong to Hamburg. So yes, it's a terrifying situation for many companies being in, because they really have, realizing how much dependent they were on their logistics activities or the logistics part of the business than they were in the past. So I will hope that is going to mean that logistics in generally and supply chain will be, I would say, take more serious for many more companies than they used to do. And you see that also right now.
Hans, we have about like 5 minutes, but just so you know, you will do another episode, and I will invite you, because with Rafael, I think you guys have a lot to collaborate, and we can talk about this later. Since supply chain, and we spoke about this yesterday, about the supply chain, how it's changing. We even spoke about, my interpretation is actually the supply chain combined with the customer success can be like a revenue driver, because if I'm pissed off, I want to know where my order is. And if the customer success, there's no proper systems in place, right? Where myself as a customer advisor who's there on the website say, hey, your order is, things can move a lot faster. You can become a revenue driver if you have good systems in place, and good people, of course, right, who are tracking the orders and who can be really fast. And does it make sense, Rafa? Does it make sense, Hans, what I'm trying to say? Like, it's not, I mean, things are, they have to be more integrated in a sense that that's why I think you say partners, right? You're using the word partners because the companies are looking for this integration, right? The companies that are not only looking at that sheer large volumes, but are the companies that are able to serve a brand with small volumes or large volumes, however they need, kind of like AWS, like Amazon. If you have a spike in traffic, then you will sort of say, okay, I need this amount of servers for the day, and that's probably the challenge in the industry. And customer success, so the brand, or the logistics partner being able to quickly respond where the order is for the customer makes a lot of difference. So I would like to maybe have a final question about the major trends that you're seeing. So the integration in the industry, that's something you just said. So customer success, customer experience, if you like. And then yesterday you mentioned something about e-commerce, sustainable practices.
Yeah.
So we can finalize this and yeah.
But basically, I think if you're able to, I think it's possible to, or it is possible, but you have to looking at look that way. You can really make supply chain a competitive advantage for your business if you want to, if you take it seriously. And you just mentioned something about the sustainable journey about e-commerce, right? There's I'm also familiar with or supporting and working with a company who has created a platform helping brands to resell their product, particularly for the women's fashion industry. You buy something online and you suddenly aren't in favor of using after 6 to 8 months. That's more known in women's fashions in the men's fashion. You were able to sell it back to the brand and get a voucher to buy something new. This is a green way of thinking, and if you're appealing towards the younger generation and the generation who have focused on that, that's a super value point. But the interesting part of here, you can offer that to a brand without having logistics or fulfillment solution on it. You need to return it. You need to clear it, needs to take a picture of it, you need to fulfill it, needs to deliver it again when it's been ordered again. That's just what I'm seeing, like an example of how proper logistics can be a competitive advantage for you as a brand in general. Yeah. But I think, but again, it's a little bit back to what we talked about before. You have to take it seriously in order to make it a competitive advantage. It's not something, which just, require a minimum of time. Now it has to be on the agenda on the highest level for a company.
That was really nice. Well,
and again, yes, just sorry to a question about, I don't think it's about the volume either, right? That it's not. If you want to create customer experience, they don't really care how big you are and how many offers you are and how many tons of TEUs you are. That's a commodity game. But for the consumer, I'll say buying behavior or the brands who are supporting that, they don't really, as long as you support their needs in terms of support their flexibility in order to increase their sales, that's what they're focusing on.
Yeah, exactly, because that's one of the challenges that sometimes Rafa and I, we talk about. Like, he's got customers, sometimes they can be large in their country of origin, right? Yeah. But when they're starting in a new region, well, how can I guarantee that I'm going to have 1,000 orders a day? That's ridiculous, right?
That's true. That's true.
So and that's the kind of thing that a logistics partner and the whole sort of fulfillment partner should also adapt, because we didn't even touch global expansion, which I think we should do a follow-up on this, and is something that is probably very close to your heart, right?
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah,
it's actually something that I wanted to discuss more as well. I wanted to talk more about the global growth and cross-border specifically, and what would make sense for brands then moving forward to a global expansion. Would it be best to focus more on cross-border, or maybe open local depots where they can store their goods and then move goods across, kind of mirroring a similar structure that Amazon has built for the FBA. Yeah. But I don't know. I think we're out of time.
We will do a follow-up. I promise. Hans, I'm talking about this follow-up also because Paragon is going to have their own sort of global expansion and Amazon sort of content as well. So you're most welcome to join the other channel.
Thank you.
We would be very, very happy to have you as a thought leader. You know a lot. There's been fantastic. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time. It was awesome.
Carlos. Thank you for the opportunity, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Hans.
Appreciate it.